Hello, this is Lynda Wright, and I'm here today with Macon Memories at Randolph-Macon College. Today is August 12th, 2009, and I'm here today with Don Henretty and Tom Inge.
I'm Don Henretty, class of 1959. I spent 4 wonderful years here at Randolph-Macon and have been involved in the alumni affairs. We had a great time just a month or so ago when we had our 50th reunion, which was a very fast time in many ways. And to me it was interesting how our interests have changed over the years. In earlier reunions, it would seem everyone was really focused more on career and achievement and that type of thing. Now, after 50 years, it's all of those differences and that competition in many ways seems to have vanished or diminished. And it was just fun to see people. Some of them I hadn't seen in 50 years.
Yes, it was fun, Don. I think we probably might find it useful to talk a little bit about how we got here to start with. And maybe you'd like to lead off by telling how it was you happened to come to Randolph-Macon College.
Well, when I was in high school, the minister at our church in Arlington was Dr. H.P. Clark, father of Lambeth Clark, who was a vice president at Randolph-Macon and various other things at
later
times.
Became president of Virginia Wesleyan.
And later president at Virginia Wesleyan. And he was not married at that time, and he came to Arlington maybe once a month or so to visit his parents, and he was always recruiting for Randolph-Macon. Actually, at that time, he was also recruiting in the high schools. I remember his coming to Washington Lee High School. Our next pastor was Carl Haley, who did not go to Randolph-Macon, but was a pastor at Duncan Memorial probably in the 1940s, and he was invited down to the groundbreaking for the chapel, I believe it was.
No kin to Dr. Haley, who taught Greek here.
No.
Mm-hmm.
But he asked me to ride along with him, not knowing it was a subtle introduction to the college. And there was a reception at what was then the parsonage, which is where probably Estes Dining Hall is now. And I remember meeting George Terry and several other professors and so on. And my wife asked me last night, well, what impressed you most? And I said, well, a lot of the buildings were covered with ivy, and I thought that's the way a college should look. And at Washington Lee High School, our class alone had over 1,000 people, and I really was looking for a small school. How about you, Tom? What drew you here?
Well, mine's, in a sense, not unlike yours in that it's connections that brought me here, people who cared about the college. No one in my family had ever been to college. My people were, on my mother's side, tobacco sharecroppers who came to Virginia looking for work during the Depression. My father's side were laborers and bakers, hardworking people, basically. And we were growing up in what is a working class ghetto, in a sense, in Richmond, Oregon Hill, it was called. It was where the poor people ended up, people looking for work and jobs and coming there from rural communities. Kind of a tough neighborhood in a lot of ways, too. And so the possibility of going to college just didn't occur to me. I could draw, and I love comic strips, comic books, and I guess I thought that might be my future. And so I planned to go into commercial art somehow. But at John Marshall High School, there were 2 teachers, Mary Bailey Ragland, who taught English, and Hallie Hootman, who was my homeroom teacher, both the residents of Ashland, both friends of the college. And they grabbed me by the arm and said, you really need to go to college. They could tell that apparently I had I can't possibly afford to do that. My family don't have any money to send me to school. So they put me in the car one day and drove me out here to Randolph-Macon, introduced me to J. Earl Moreland, and on their say-so, he offered me an acceptance and a tuition scholarship. No SAT scores, no letters of recommendation. Of course, presidents could do that in those days. Now it would have been impossible. And now that was only tuition, so then I had to go to work during the summers, worked at the highway department in Richmond to make up money to pay for the room and board the rest of the time. And that opened the door that made it all possible. But an amazing thing as I think back on it, and I still marvel at it a bit. Now, once we got here...
well, I just wanted to add, I don't know whether you remember this, but it was in the fall of our freshman year. The two of us went into Richmond. It was on a weekday, and we went by John Marshall High School.
Did we really?
Because you wanted to go by and just report to them how well you were doing or how much you liked the school and everything. And John Marshall High School, if I recall correctly, was down near the John Marshall House, wasn't it? Right in
yeah, it went on the
downtown?
corner beside it. Yeah, and of course all that's gone now, but
Yeah.
that's the way it was then. Don is typical of the kind of people I met here. Many of us became very close friends. I think a lot of us had intellectual interest, even though sometimes we didn't know what they were. I, at that time, had planned to go into the ministry. I don't think you harbored thoughts of that kind, did you?
I toyed with it,
Sure.
but teaching was really what I wanted to do.
I mean, just about all of our friends were pre-ministerial people. Now, my background was not in Methodist Church. It was the what was once called the Evangelical and Reformed Church, which merged back some time ago when ecumenicism was the order of the day with the Congregational Christian Church to form what is now called the United Church of Christ. To put it simple, it was Lutheran descended, typical mainstream product, not much different from Methodism for that matter. But in any case, in the kinds of intense conversations we used to have about life, about theology, about God, about everything, and my God, Don, I remember people standing around for hours and just talking, in the entrance to the dorm about these things, a kind of intellectual activity that you don't unfortunately see very much of today. And I think in that thought process of thinking things through, you apparently felt that the desire to educate early on. I came around to it by way of the ministry, feeling that I really wanted to put myself in a larger context than the church allows in terms of being able to relate to and teach people. So we ended up both in education, nevertheless, which means we were of a like mind probably at the start.
When I came here, I didn't. There were a few other people from my class that came here, but they were not really friends. And just before, maybe a week before coming to college, one of my mother's many cousins called, and a friend of theirs growing up was a missionary in India. His name was Conrad Hines.
Yes.
And his son was coming from India to go to Randolph-Macon. And I think he stayed here a couple of years, and then when his parents came back, he went to Drew University. And but he had no way to get here, so he rode down with us. If you can imagine, two freshmen and my parents all putting all their stuff in one car at that time. I don't think that would happen today. And then when I arrived, this person was going upstairs who was rooming above us, above me in Thomas Branch. His name is Kit Morris, Christopher Ludwig Morris.
About a brain.
And his mother was from Middletown, Virginia, and lived on one side of the Methodist Church. My dad was from Middletown and lived on the other side. And they were essentially about the same age and had grown up together. And so even though it was a small class, there were some instant connections.
I don't think you and I were roommates, though, were we?
No, I don't think so.
Do you remember who your roommates were?
I do. I had a roommate the first year, Jimmy Cock, who lived in Beaver Dam.
That's what we tell on our friends and colleagues here.
And then Elliot Hancock Do you remember
Mhm,
Elliot?
sure.
He lives in Arkansas now. Bill King went on to teach, and then the last year, a couple of these years, I was an RA. So Jack Denton had a room over in Mary Branch, and that's the one I wanted, and I had first dibs on it. None of my friends wanted to move up there because that was the freshman dorm. So Jack and I got along very well because we weren't involved in any of the same activities, and so come in and out as you please, and so on.
I can't remember all of mine for some reason. I'm not quite sure. I remember one was Douglas Hogg, who I think went into the Episcopal ministry.
I think he did.
I think later. There was another young man whom I shouldn't name. I don't think he finished, and he had a lot of emotional problems. And I apparently came back one day, and he had taken some pills, and I called the nurse to come over, and he claims I saved his life at that time. I'm not quite sure. I don't know this day whether it was a dramatic act on his part or whether he really had taken pills. Poor fellow. I hope he succeeded in the world somehow. And come to think of it, I can't mention the name of the other person either because that was my first semester here, and he disappeared one night because he went before the Honor Council.
Oh.
Turned out he had been borrowing my essays from my desk and copying them and putting them back and submitting them to the English professor. What he didn't know was we both had the same English professor. And the poor fellow, I've always worried about him because he was the son of a Methodist minister and had planned to go to law school and join the FBI. So I hope somehow he got over this and was able to do that.
I remember that.
But the Honor Council, that was a pretty tough thing in those
Yes.
days. And when they found you guilty, you left overnight. You packed your bags and got out of there. And it's kind of draconian, when you think about this sort of thing. And in fact, one of the things I tried to do when I came back as a faculty member here was I got to work trying to modify the Honor Code. I always felt that a single sanction, and that was it, whatever you were guilty of, no matter, how grievous the sin, expulsion was the single penalty. And I've always felt like that was not quite fair, and I think that roommate, I always worried about him over the years because I felt, well, you make one mistake,
Right.
You give somebody a chance. What is Christianity about but salvation and redemption, for heaven's sakes? And I felt like this wasn't quite square with that. So I did help modify it. Now it's evolved further, so it's a lot more complicated than it was. But I felt it was more fair. But I must have had other roommates, but interestingly enough, I can only remember the guys who got into trouble. It seems like.
You turned them all in so you'd have a single room. That's what
It was trying to get a single room. But, we were all young and trying to get ahead and trying to learn, try to do right. And a lot of people slipped. Particularly, with the drinking that was going on camp. That was a problem then. Even though the Methodist Church was much a stronger influence in those days.
Yeah.
And I don't think you joined a fraternity, did you?
Well, you were Lambda Chi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I pledged Lambda Chi.
Did you?
Yeah.
The first year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I dropped that pledge.
Okay.
Thinking my responsibility was to earn enough money for my expenses during the year. Is this what I want to do with it? And
Yeah.
I guess it didn't rank as high as some other things.
I did not pledge my first year, in fact, and had planned not to join a fraternity. But what happened was a lot of our friends, same people who you knew who pledged with you were in that fraternity. And I think half the fraternity was pre-ministers, which didn't mean they didn't have a party, mind you, because the other half of the fraternity were football players. Mm-hmm. And they had some wild parties, but then the nice guys would end up just cleaning up after the football players. Yeah. And so I did go ahead and join. I think Kit Morse was in there, too. He may have been a major influence greatly. The experience was not very beneficial to me personally. I've never maintained bonds with the with people. That was not the way I made my friends, let's put it that way. Social connections, were nice, but I was more interested in kindred spirits and intellectual connections and things like that. And the fraternities in those days were, unfortunately, not as inclined towards that as they were towards having a good time.
Well, there was also the Independence Organization,
There was.
which then I became a part of and was president for 2 years.
Oh,
and,
were you? I had forgotten that.
Our dues were 50 cents a month. I could panhandle that. So,
Well, it was a nice thing, to have. I remember they used to meet in the old gym.
right.
Which is not there anymore.
Yeah. But that's where a lot of my friends, and most of them had pledged various fraternities. And, I remember ODK had sponsored an extracurricular competition. I don't know whether you remember this. They had a cup, and there were points awarded for various types of participation. And at the end of the year, the fraternity or independence organization that had the highest average was awarded the cup. Well, the independence won it the first 2 years, and then it was discontinued after that, as far as I know. Because there were a lot of very active people in
I think it was not a problem being in or out of a fraternity.
Right.
A few of the fraternities were rather high-minded about things, and you had to be hoorah Southern to be a Kappa Alpha.
Right.
Phi Delta Theta used to have the highest grade point average, and they were very high-minded about who they would select and so on. The rest of the fraternities were a bit more flexible. Obviously, they let me in. So, and they were kind of an important part of the fabric in the sense that none of us had automobiles. Not none, but very few had automobiles. Right. And we couldn't just get in the car and drive to Richmond or Fredericksburg, which would be the two places we'd go, mainly to try to see the women at Mary Washington College, it was then, all female, or to Richmond, since I had connections there. If you couldn't get to one of those two places, there was nothing you could do. And there was no entertainment much on campus. So I think probably, at least it gave some of the people a place to go and sit and they would watch television. They would watch the Mickey Mouse Club, I know, and American Bandstand and make comments about the various features of the young ladies who were dancing on screen, drink much of the time. But at least it was an outlet, I suppose, for people that felt that need to have some sort of social life. They were, I don't think they ever were. Well, you did live in them. I'm sorry. They did have rooms, didn't you? But not food. Food was not served in them.
Right.
And when, of course, fraternities came into being, college campus didn't have dormitories, didn't have dining facilities, and therefore if you didn't join a fraternity or a club of some kind, you had no place to stay or eat. But at this point in our history, they pretty much boiled down to social life, I think. So I guess they're important to some people still. I don't want to ever reflect on people who really care about fraternities. For them, it's a signal event in their lives.
Right.
And they get a sense of identity out of it, and I think that's fine. But I think Don and I were just too independent-minded people to worry too much about that. What led you, once you graduated, Don, to stay involved and in touch with the college to the extent you did? I think you're one of the few people I know who, right from the beginning, obviously you were going to be of help to the college, and were always there trying to do things.
Well, the first couple of years, I had a lot of friends that were still here who were underclassmen, and so would come back fairly often. And and once they graduated, I didn't have that specific connection. But I taught high school, and I think
What did you teach? I'm not sure.
I taught history and government.
Did you take your BA in history?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
My real interest was government,
Sure.
but Dr. Oliver taught the only course, which I took.
Of course.
But I would always send the college the names of maybe 10 or 12 people that I thought might be good prospects in terms of their academic back. Follow up with those, and a fair number over the years did attend. And then I just always liked going to the football games and later to the basketball games. And my wife is a real sports fan, and so that really makes it good. A lot of times she's more encouraging than I am. Oh, come on, we can leave now and we can get to Ashland for the game tonight.
But the college must have given you something special, too.
Well, I've just always felt that it's a part of my identity, and I just think that because of its size, because of the connections with the professors and with the people who were here at the time, and while I haven't remained close friends over the years with many people, there's still an influence that continues in our lives from those people that, as you say, we had the conversations with and so on. So I don't know whether you remember this or not, but when I was at O'Hare one summer in Chicago, and I see this guy walking down very fast, and it was Tom, and I was going the other way, and we were trying to catch connecting flights. I was going to the University of Nebraska, and you were going somewhere else for some writing course or something that you were teaching or taking or whatever, Tom is, who would ever think here? And
I think we would know each other instantly if we saw each other anywhere.
Yeah. So how about you? I know you had several academic stops along the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing the college did was to disabuse me of the notion I could be a cartoonist, and I decided I better go for literature. That's my other passion, my other love in life. And so much of my life was a kind of unfolding of opportunities I didn't know what would happen, like, having a chance to go to college to start with. So when I finished, I decided, well, I was attracted to education too, and I thought I might teach a high school, and a master's degree seemed to be the thing to do. And I won a fellowship, fortunately, which would carry me for at least 3 years through graduate education if I wanted to pursue it. The only stipulation was I had to attend a Southern university, and it was one of those philanthropic efforts on the part of the North to help Southerners raise themselves by their bootstraps. Like Andrew Carnegie went through that building libraries, said those poor fools read a book and it might help them out. This was another one of those efforts. I'm glad it happened, mind you, but the notion was, well, let's help those poor Southerners help themselves. So there was someone here on the counseling staff or on missions, someone in admissions. What was his name? Robertson?
Yeah, Bill Robinson.
Yeah. And he had been to Vanderbilt. I knew nothing about graduate schools much, but the fellowship, I could take it anywhere I could be accepted. I applied to I didn't apply to UVA because I was warned against it. There was a big fight going on in the English department over there. In fact, Dick Hasker told me about that, and Bill McElwain, and that if you went there, you would walk into the middle of this internecine warfare going on. Chapel Hill was a big place for American literature, but when I applied down there, they said, you don't have any courses on your record in American literature. So either you can come down and take an examination or take a class when you get here. I said, well, who needs that? And, of course, the reason I didn't have American literature was Dick Wood taught the American literature. And as much as I love Dick Wood, I decided not to take his classes for reasons that will not go stated here.
I took his classes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fellow was a phenomenon, and he knew his stuff, but he never stopped lecturing. Never stopped lecturing, and you would sit there, and I don't know what kind of grading. He was pretty tough grader, wasn't he? Yeah. Anyway, for whatever reason, I didn't do that, and University of Florida accepted me, and Vanderbilt accepted me. But not only that, Vanderbilt offered me a fellowship. Now, we had a connection at Vanderbilt, not just Robertson, but in the English department there, where it was a graduate of Randolph-Macon. He was in Victorian literature. Edgar Hill Duncan was his name. And he kind of kept his eye open for Randolph-Macon boys to come to Vanderbilt and would try to encourage them. I got a ship to carry, but if they offer me one, that's where I'd rather go. That's what led me to Vanderbilt. I had no idea that Vanderbilt had been a center of literary activity in the 1930s, that it had a whole history of presence in Southern culture and Southern literature. All that was totally foreign to me. I would find out about it all and would end up writing about a lot of it, but that's another story. But by the time I finished my master's, I realized I had a brain, I had a mind, and that I enjoyed the research very much, and therefore I said, well, I think I'll just stay on to finish the PhD, and I did finish the PhD. Now, when I got through, my first job out was at Michigan State University, and I was there for 5 years. Then they started building Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and some people in the English department there knew about me and my work, and they thought it was great since although I was not born in Richmond, I grew up there. They thought it'd be great for me to come back, and that was really a thing I'm glad I did. I got there a year after the university started, and we built it up from scratch. And being a Richmonder and being sort of shut out in the sense of UVA and VPI because of distance and those distant schools, I understood what the needs of Richmond were for someone like myself, working class family, and opportunities that were hard to find. So that was a great experience. But then I was attracted to Clemson University to chair the English department there for 4 years. Then I was invited a chance to work for the government. I'm sorry, this is a long recitation. With the U.S. Information Agency and the Department of State. The idea was they wanted somebody to travel and try to help the development of the study of American history, literature, and culture in other countries. And I always believed that if they studied our culture, their film, our books, our novels, that other countries would understand us better. So it suited me to a T, this job did. So what was a one-year appointment turned into a 2-year appointment, and I did diplomatic work in about 24 different countries. That was a really great time and a pleasure to do. By then, Liddell Payne had been knocking at my door, and he had known about my work in Southern literature and that I was a graduate of the college. And so they had the Blackwell Chair in Humanities here, and I was, having been in large universities all my career, really, except for the undergraduate experience, I wasn't quite sure what it would mean coming back to a school like this to teach. And particularly, some of my own professors still on the faculty. It had become coeducational, which while I regretted, because I think an all-male school was a great idea for me at that time in my life. It kept my mind on my studies anyway. The school, I think, had to move that way to survive. And so this turned out to be to the benefit, because I can tell you this, women in the class make a difference. They do their reading, they do their work, they're willing to discuss things in the way that guys hardly ever are, unfortunately. So in any case, I decided to go ahead and give it a try. Now I've been here for 25 years, it turns out. Yeah, a larger amount of time than anywhere else I've spent my life. But it's been a great experience, and I've had an ideal situation because they have strongly supported my research, and I've had the opportunity to teach anything I wanted to. And I couldn't ask for a better opportunity than that.
Would you like to talk about your teaching experience?
Well, certainly. When I first graduated, I applied to several school systems. I'd grown up in Arlington, but by the time I graduated, my dad had been transferred to Philadelphia. I certainly was not going to go to New Jersey or Pennsylvania. An alien culture to me at that time. And so at that time, the Fairfax schools had 8th grade in the high school. And so I ended up teaching English and history combos in the 8th grade, and then a 9th grade English class. I remember that summer as I was working at camp, trying to relearn the definitions of what is a sentence and things like that, which had kind of fled from my memory. And I really enjoyed it, but I really liked the high school also, and they were opening about 8 or 9 intermediate.
This was not your own school?
No, it wasn't. But it was where Doug Ford had gone. If you
Oh.
remember Doug, and
Yeah.
Bill Mahan, and several of these people at all. Annandale was only about 5 years old when I went there. And so I wanted to stay, so I taught English the second year, ninth grade English. And then the next year is ninth grade English, guidance 1 or 2 periods, and maybe an 11th grade history. And
The value of a liberal arts education, you see?
Right. And then I came back one year and they said, we noticed you're certified in Spanish. I said, do not even go there because I can't get Tom Inge to come up here and help me with it because 3 times a week I have to go to Tom while we translated Pensativa and some other novels that we were reading. Somehow I missed the key verbs in all of these things, and the story turned out different for me. So I was successful in not having to teach that. But I moved with that group through the 8th grade. I had many of them in 9th grade, many of them in 11th, and many of them in 12th. And they graduated in 1964. And once a month, there's a group of about 12 to 15 of them who get together for dinner. And I'm a part of that class. I go with them. Of course, they're in their 60s now, and they still say, now, Mr. Henretty, you remember now, I'm only about 8 years older than you are. So.
Well, one of the differences about teaching it, for example, in a school, in a community, public school, or teaching in college, here they graduate and they go all over the world. But in a community, they stay there frequently, marry, settle down, and therefore you will see your students for the rest of your life.
Yeah. In Northern Virginia, that's not as likely to happen, but this particular group has been very good. But they have emails for, people all over the country, and they send messages back and forth. So I ended up teaching there for 6 years, and then I had a fellowship to the University of Virginia for experienced teachers of history, which paid all tuition, and the stipend was more than I was earning as a teacher in Fairfax County. And I said, I think I will do this. And so the masters, and they were all teachers. There were 20 teachers from all over the country, and we all taught history, and that was good. Came back and taught for a number of years after that. Then I went into director of athletics and student activities.
Oh, my goodness.
Which was very different. And I did that for 2 years. Really missed being, with the students. Everyone who came in that office needed something, and I stood between them and obtaining it. Went back and taught. Ended up 33 years in Fairfax when I retired. And then I went to St. Stephen's, St. Agnes, which is an Episcopal school in Alexandria. And I was there either part-time or full-time for 9 years. And it was much different. And I had almost all AP classes in history and government. And excellent students. So one class I had for AP history and then later AP government, I guess out of the 17 or 18 in it, probably 10 of them went to Ivy League schools, and they were well motivated and so on. But it also meant a lot of work for the
Did you do
teacher.
some administrative work too, or
just in the student activities area.
Yeah.
And
Did you think about doing that?
I had the opportunity several times. I don't mean for this to be a controversial statement, but I guess in my mind, I was thinking my interest really was more in the teaching part and the relationship with
Sure.
students. I think college, that is still part of it, but you become more oriented towards a particular field academically, and that becomes
Discipline.
even more
Yeah.
important. And mine was more of an eclectic interest in things.
Yeah, and I think that, in talking about coming back to college, I had done some administrative work at VCU as head of an English department. And when I came back here, of course, I was reminded me of when I got back here was this is what I really like. It's the contact with students. And if I don't have that outlet, I mean, one of the nice things about teaching is you have ideas to yourself, and you get a chance to go to class and share them with a class,
Right.
and talk about them. If you don't have that classroom, you don't have that opportunity. And to me, to be in the educational world, as is true for you, I think that classroom is the most essential part.
And at Annandale, there were a tremendous number of foreign-born students. Even greater number now.
Oh, sure.
There is no majority population at Annandale. And I just really enjoyed that. And I guess I'm really envious when I see the opportunities now that students have in college with the January term and the study abroad for a semester and so on. I would have taken a greater interest in Spanish if I knew I was going to be using it somewhere. And I've said those bad things about Spanish, but when we went to Spain a few years ago, I was surprised at how much I could. I could carry on a conversation, but boy, I could pick the items off the menu and follow directions and so on.
Well, if it's any consolation, I did a double major in English and Spanish. When I got to graduate school, Spanish counted for nothing. French and German were the language you had to learn.
Yes.
So it did me not one bit of good, except when I did get to go teach in Spain and South America, of course, then it became more useful. But Spanish is, right now it's a second language in the United States, so it's sort of become more important than it was. And incidentally, I'm going to take a group, along with Jack Trammell, take a group of students to Romania this January term.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to follow the trail of Dracula.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so that'll be fun. But yeah, they didn't have things like that when you and I were here.
No.
And just as well, probably. We couldn't afford it.
Well, right. There were a few foreign students here, though.
We always had a few, yeah, and I think that was probably the missionary efforts of J.R.O. Moreland. He spent a long time as a missionary in Brazil and other parts of the world, too, I think. And he always had his eye out, I think, for attracting foreign students.
Do you remember there were a few students from Saudi Arabia?
There were.
The conversations. And I remember on this floor where I was an RA, we had several students from New York and New Jersey, and I think they were all Jewish, and then we had these guys from Saudi Arabia on the next floor, and they'd get into these heated discussions, civil, I would say.
Yeah.
But, it was, those are really interesting.
Yeah, we used to, a lot of kids used to come from New York and New Jersey, but for a reason. Not only because we were a good school, but most of them wanted to get into medical school. Mm-hmm. And it was almost impossible, apparently, in New York to get into the medical. Down here, we had a feeder program with Medical College of Virginia. And so a lot of them came here just to get that steps towards getting into the Medical College of Virginia. You may remember we had a program that you could go for 3 years, and if you did very well, you went straight into medical school, no BA degree,
right,
and headed right for your MD degree. Now, I had a friend named John Sowers. I don't remember John or not. He got into medical school, hated it, stopped short of finishing his MD degree, and had to come back and finish his BA degree, and they wouldn't let him in Phi Beta Kappa for that reason.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, although he was straight A's.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Because he had broken, you have to have, I don't know, some 4-year pattern. It's kind of silly, but I don't want to say Phi Beta Kappa silly, mind you. For the historic record, they're not silly. But anyway, a lot of kids came down from New York area for that reason, and it enriched the campus. I mean, Ezra Sokol, do you remember?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Lord, I don't know whether he's even alive anymore. I don't think he was at the last any of the reunions.
Well, and Joe Berger,
yeah.
He called me in January. He received a letter, hold the date and so on.
Yeah,
and I think he's an OB/GYN, and he was still practicing.
No kidding.
And his office was right across the street from where he came back. And he was so excited about the reunion, and then something came up. He didn't make it, but after my folks moved to New Jersey a couple of times, I like at Thanksgiving or whatever, I would get a ride with them as far as exit whatever it was on the Jersey Turnpike and hope someone was there to meet me. They were a lot of fun, and you just had a different perspective on things, and
that was good for us.
Yes, absolutely.
And arguing with Kit Morse was even better. That guy was so bright. I mean, of course, he's demonstrated, but he's at Union Theological Seminary in the Bonhoeffer Chair in Ethics. But I always had the feeling he was playing with my brain, that he was so smart. And I know he would say things to provoke me and get me to arguing with him that he didn't really believe himself, mainly because it would irritate me. But it's the only time I've ever felt like somebody played with my intellect the way he did. And he was nice to have around. A prince of a man, I must say, too. Nice person.
Yeah. So who did you major under Dick Hasker then, or?
Well, he was my advisor, but I took freshman English with him and therefore tried to avoid all of his classes thereafter. He was the toughest grader on earth. Yep. And it's turned out now he's one of my closest friends. It's the strangest sort of thing. He's a very reclusive sort of fellow, and he doesn't attend things at the college and doesn't like public displays of any kind. And in any case, my wife and I have sort of been taking him out to dinner and so on, and have become close friends. But it's like it's a different context, a different person. Bill McElwain I never took classes with, but he's living in town and has been a friend too.
Yeah, I was in his class the first year he taught.
You were.
And
then
saw him at the 50th reunion, and he was just talking about with the graduates' names now on the sidewalk and everything, and on his daily walks when he goes by that, he can picture everyone, and probably more so in your first class than later, because I tend to remember the ones I taught very first time.
But now I find myself one of the senior faculty members here, and I'm one of those old guys. Now, in fact, there aren't very many people who are still teaching who were here when I came to teach 25 years ago. Yeah. But it's almost as if they're two different histories, though. I mean, the history of the school, as Don and I knew it, as an all-male school, and with a strong emphasis of the church, the number of pre-ministerial students here, it was almost a feeder school for seminaries.
Yeah.
That was a different world, and it certainly had its charm and its value. The college today is just a different kind of institution, yet it has its roots in those traditions and those standards that the college always stood for. So in a way, it's kind of old-fashioned probably in comparison to many schools, but for that reason, I think it holds its own in the scheme of things.
George Oliver was my advisor, and so I had him every semester I was here, plus senior project, and I still graduated.
Well, yeah. And he was a good friend of mine before he retired here. We used to kid about it because he held the Brown chair of history, and I had the Blackwell chair, and he said, well, if we can get two more, we can have a table set. But he's been great fun. I'm sure you've done oral history with him.
Yeah.
And he is full of stories I'm quite sure that neither Don nor I would ever know about.
Well, he has the institutional knowledge.
Yes, he does. Jim Scanlon and him. Too.
I did the interview with those two together. James
That should have been interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure that was fun. Yeah.
Any other faculty members that you remember taking classes with, or any that had an influence on you?
Well, I remember some of the, quote, electives I took weren't in the major field. Actually, we had to take 4 semesters of science, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Lab science had to be one of them.
Well, you could take these other courses in place. And I had geology for 2 semesters with Dr. Miller.
Scholar Miller, yeah.
And then I took astronomy with Dr. Simpson. Both of those courses were just introduced me to topics that I really didn't know anything about, but certainly had a lot of contact with. And I remember also a psychology class with Dr. McEwen, which I had as part of my preparation for teaching. Jim Boyce taught Old and New Testament. Almost everyone took Mr. Terry's class, but Jim Boyce was the kind of new voice. And again, it was Bible as literature and almost the historiography involved within it and so on. And I just found that very fascinating.
Well, you have to understand all that to understand history or literature.
Right. And it's too bad. I mean, I understand that you want to give more choices, but somewhere people miss out on some of the things that might help them understand what's going on today, or understanding what their needs are, and so on. And well, another one was Dr. Jones's Roman history and Dr. Mabry's Southern history. They were semester courses, and they were just very interesting people, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were interesting people who would come to a school like this to teach. A lot of them didn't have PhDs. I mean, the college really couldn't afford to hire PhDs very easily, and most PhDs would go to universities to teach first. I remember one semester when after Haley died, and they needed to bring in a replacement to teach Greek, and he brought in a young man who just finished his PhD at Johns Hopkins. I don't remember his name. He was only here for a year, but he had a PhD, so he was full professor from the day he arrived. And the other professors sort of disliked him because they thought that was unfair. But it went to show. I mean, you can get an education in a lot of ways, and life experience sometimes is more valuable than book experience. And what we end up teaching very often, rather than subject matter, is how to learn. We show them where the resources are,
right,
how to accumulate and analyze and build an argument. You give them skills of that sort. And if you have those skills, then you can go off on your own and become as highly educated as you wish. So a lot of those people were that way. There were people for a variety of reasons who either couldn't afford to go to grad school, get a PhD, didn't want one because they felt like that they knew as much as they needed to know. And master's degrees used to count for a lot more, of course, than they do now. So it was an interesting mix of people, not, I dare say, like what you would have met at an average university at that time. And the one thing that was true of all of them was they were very committed to the school and to the classroom. Lord knows they weren't paid enough, so if they didn't have a commitment, that's the thing that held them. The one other person I want to add to these is Burnell Panel.
Right, I did not have him.
Yeah, I think Burnell Panel, he taught philosophy, mainly. Logic I took with him, though. Only one course I got an A on examination in was logic. I don't know how I did it because I'm not a logical person. But I think he was probably the best professor I had. Others had their virtues and so on. But a lot has to do with the personality, I think. But I responded to him more deeply, I think, than I did to most of the others, although I learned a lot from them. But there's one story about him I want to put on the record here. At least it's related to him. And I told a young lady who was doing some research a few years ago about the Stylus magazine, about this. She was apparently looking at other student publications. When Don and I were here, the Yellow Jacket newspaper came out every week. And the annual came out annually, of course. And I don't know whether you felt this way or not, but my feeling was the two most prestigious positions on campus was to edit the newspaper or edit the yearbook. Mm-hmm. Well, I desperately wanted to edit the newspaper, and with my writing aspirations and so on, and I was doing political cartoons. But that year we had a whole lot of veterans back. In fact, we had a lot of veterans around in general on the GI Bill. And a young man came up with the yearbook, which was great fun, and I turned it into something even more fun because I wrote letters to President Dwight Eisenhower, President of Ford Motor Company, Bob Hope, Mickey Mantle, Bela Schick, who invented the Schick, inoculations, and asked them to write letters for our yearbook. And lo and behold, they all responded except Albert Schweitzer. He didn't respond to my letter.
I never reached him.
No, it's probably still on its way to Africa somewhere. And I had cartoonists, Milton Caniff, Charles Schultz. Others did drawings for that yearbook. Anyway, what you did, you edited the yearbook as a junior for the graduating class. So mine was the 58, the one I edited. So, but anyway, there was one of those yearbooks. It's a yearbook that I'm trying to get around to. I'm sorry, this is more convoluted than I meant for it to be. But, and it would have been either like 56 or 57, I think. And they noticed that pages were missing in the rear of the book. And this young lady who was doing the research. And she called me and said, "Do you know anything about this?" I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do." "Do you remember? I don't know if you remember this or not, Don. But in those days, you were not allowed to drink in the dormitories, nor were you allowed to have a young lady into your dormitory room. And lo and behold, what do? They put pictures in the yearbook of drinking in the dorm with women on the beds, in proper uniform, mind you, but nevertheless scandalous enough. Well, the book arrived, the yearbook arrived. Burnell Panel, as Dean of Men at the time, saw it and sat down in his office and excised every single one of those pages in the yearbook with a razor. I can't remember now how I saw him doing it or something like that. And I remember asking him, I said, "Dr. Panel, don't you think you should put one of those yearbooks in the library archives as a record?" He said, "Absolutely not." So there is no complete copy of that yearbook, my guess is, unless he kept it, and I don't think he did, in existence. Do you remember when that happened?
I do, yeah.
I guess it was common knowledge, wasn't it?
Well, because I think it became an issue,
Yeah.
and they had to explain it to chapel or something, but I think they were afraid of legal ramifications. I mean, that was one of the things that they said. The parents of
we had censorship.
And talk about chapel. You had that every week, every day?
We had it twice a week, didn't we?
I think so.
I think so. Chapel was not always religious in nature. A lot of times it was
I
speaker.
think once a week it may have been religious, and once a week
was
academic,
a speaker
maybe.
of some sort, or something student related, and it would either be in the auditorium in Blackwell or it would be in Duncan Memorial, and they passed out these little slips. Do you remember those? You had to sign them and turn them in when you left because you could only get so many cuts a semester for those. And there was always suspicion that people were signing their friends in.
I'm sure they were.
Which would have been an honor offense. But I don't remember anyone being actually apprehended for that.
Was it coats and ties at one day a week or something? Or where did
I don't really remember that.
It seemed like on a Friday or something. Why that would be, though, I don't know. I can't remember any logic for it. The professors all wore coats and ties. I mean, I don't know they were required to, but it wasn't too long before we got here. I think they were still wearing academic robes.
You were talking about Professor Wood a while ago. He was my professor for American literature, and he was a difficult grader, and he often lectured with his eyes closed, and for some reason they were testing or something in Foxhall, and we were having our classes over in Pace, which was the chemistry building at that time.
It's the art gallery building there now, almost at Pace.
It's and we can go or something. And someone saw, he used to ride his bicycle all around, and could see him coming down from the chapel area on his bike, and we all went back and sat down. It was the longest time before he came in. And he came in, he had his head down, and he took his book pack off his off his back.
Before everybody else in the world had packs, he did.
Yeah, oh, yes.
He was one of the first.
He was a trailblazer. And he threw it down on the desk. And he said, in my haste to get here on time, I fell off my bike. Well, no one laughed because you just didn't know how he was going to take it. And he always wore a corduroy jacket. And when he turned around to write something on the board, he had leaves stuck onto the back of his coat, and everyone just broke up. So he couldn't single anyone out. We were.
There's a story, I don't witness this, maybe you did, that he would, closing his eyes, would actually walk back and forth in front of the class, and once he stepped in the trash can, and he kept right on walking.
Well, he didn't like for anyone to look at the clock either. And
No.
He looked up one day, because he always went over, and the door was
way
open,
over.
And someone was looking at the clock, and he just went over, and he kicked the trash can right out into the hall. And one of the 3 co-eds in the school was walking down the hall, and it either hit her, and he just melted then. But I was talking to George Oliver about that last month, and I was next door. I heard all that commotion and so on.
We just had him back at campus.
I know. I would like to.
And he's such a mere shadow of his former self, as you can imagine. But sweet person now. Fine poet. He's been writing good poetry. But it was sort of nice to see him. But he and between him and Dick Hasker, I think they generated the most legends on campus. And Dick for being a tough grader, too. Boy, was he ever tough. First paper I submitted right out of high school, I got a D on. And I was so upset, and Mary Bailey Ragland, the woman I mentioned, lived in that house right by Duncan Memorial Methodist Church. She left it to the church when she died. So she was just across the street, so I marched over there with my paper from Haskell with a D on it. And I said, Miss Ragland, look, you gave me A's all the time. Look what I got. And she looked at it and says, Tommy, you're in college now. And she shut the door. And left me to my devices and to survive Dick Hasker on my own.
And yours was probably the highest grade in the class.
Probably.
Because I had a D on my first one also, and I went over to see Lambeth Clark about something, and he says, have you gotten any papers back in English yet? And I said, yes. And so I happened to have it with me. I showed it to him, and you could see where the student grader had put a B on it, and it had been erased, and Mr. McElwain had put a D on it. And that got everyone's attention right away. When we were first here, Duncan Memorial was in the present old chapel, and the congregation met upstairs. And after dinner each night, I've always been fascinated by construction, and I'd go over and check the new chapel to see what they'd done that day, how many cinder blocks and so on. And then when they opened it, they marched on a Sunday morning from the old chapel over to the new. And eventually the downstairs part of the chapel was turned into a small theater. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was in the players, and we gave the first play in that part. John Longacre directed all the plays then, and it was kind of a more intimate setting.
Well, I think we may have exhausted our memories for the moment. No doubt I'll think of a dozen things to say later tonight. But
any final thoughts of your experience or summing up?
I wouldn't change anything.
No.